Hey, it's Drybear. It's been about 12 days since the last time we checked on the leaderboards for all of the leagues in Path of Exile 2, so let's check in on how things have been developing, what distribution of classes are in there now, and also what is making the difference in the survivability rates and what people are using for some of the harder leagues. Got a disclaimer, as always, that this is pulled from the top 1,000 of all the leaderboards online. You can find this anywhere, like you just go to this link to the ladders to see this. This is the only available detail we have that's parsable, at least from this, unless GG gives us something else, but at least is something interesting to look at to see what the best players are using in every category and how things are different over time as we see the start of early access and going forward. Starting with the class popularity in Standard League since the beginning of the month when we looked at this. So I'm showing the current percentage of each ascendancy that's showing up in the top leaderboards right now, and also the red bar is the percent change since the last time we looked at it at the beginning. So 2 weeks ago, the last time we looked at it, the change since then. So from Standard League, and again, Standard League is probably the most like extreme case because people can, whenever they want, buy a whole bunch of items off of trade and, you know, have a new build done in a matter of like an hour, and then all of a sudden they're playing something completely different. And it also means that their currency goes a lot further in that case. So usually in Standard League, we tend to see people running whatever is the flavor of the month, the most powerful interaction, the most powerful build. And for the most part, we've seen Stormweaver dominating that category ever since the beginning. I think people just like having the wizard class with a very clear, fast clear. And we've also seen Archmage Spark in general just dominate everything. It can full clear screens, it can one-shot bosses in under a second, so it's got so many options for it that make it a great choice for the trade league. However, there are some things to glean from this since the last time we looked at this. You can see, at least from the percent change, that since 2 weeks ago, Stormweaver and Deadeye have been dropping quite dramatically. You would think that this would be pretty stale or stagnant, and that's why I didn't do one of these last week, is I felt like we were far enough into the league where these things weren't going to change, but I guess I was wrong. Like Stormweaver, Deadeye dropping down, you can see that there is a noticeable increase in Gemling Legionnaire and Blood Mage, and a little bit on Pathfinder as well, which you'll see reflected in the later leagues as well. But it's kind of interesting to see people jumping ship off of Stormweaver, but the thing that you'll see at least a lot better in the other leagues as well is the rise in Gemling Legionnaire and Blood Mage with some new builds that people have been coming up with, and also potentially some major pitfalls with Deadeye. But we'll also notice that there is no change in Witch Hunter. Witch Hunter, Acolyte of Chayula, and Warbringer in Trade League are still dirt bottom, and probably I would say the biggest loser right now across all of the ascendancies, as far as one that's struggling the most, is probably going to be the Mercenary Witch Hunter across all categories, but in general, we're seeing kind of the same distribution. Now, this is a little bit of a check-in from 2 weeks ago, but also a bit of a send-off that, you know, as we get the changes coming in this week, that will make some major changes to the gameplay portion, and potentially later this month, we might see a balance update as well that will target the classes and the items and things like that. Some of the uniques are getting buffed in this upcoming patch, and some usability aspects, some bosses are getting nerfed, so we'll see how this changes once that patch goes live, and have people have time to play around with it. But rising in Gemling Legionnaire and Blood Mage, lowering quite significantly in Stormweaver and Deadeye since 2 weeks ago. Next up is Standard Solo Self-Found. Anytime you add the Solo Self-Found category to a league, it tends to be a lot more representative of the game itself, because you can't skip through some of the pain points that classes and inherent statistics and game design elements have by just buying better gear very quickly. So we're going to see a very different situation here for Standard SSF. Stormweaver Invoker still on the top and also on the rise. I think this is also just a combination of Stormweaver being very good. A lot of the best builds in the game right now are Invoker builds as well. And we also have the dual Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder interaction. That means that Invoker can build very safe, high freeze build up, get crazy screen clear potential, and also have good single target as well, especially with the Hoa gloves that give them crazy damage when they stack intelligence, lots of lightning damage and everything. I mean, even Elon, the best player in the world, was using his build that had many things on it, using the Invoker with the lightning build as well. So you can see the SSF popularity, pretty much everything lost popularity in the last 2 weeks, except for Deadeye lost a lot more. Deadeye and Titan dropped more than any other in SSF as far as climbing the leaderboards. Part of that is just them just being easier to build for without needing you know, 150 divine orbs to be able to build something reasonable. But we do see Gemling Legionnaire jumping up a little bit as well. And I think some of that just comes down to the attribute stacking build that's viable for Gemling. You would think that this would be lower in SSF, but it is still climbing up since 2 weeks ago for that overall. So Invoker Stormweaver still at the top, and it seems like the Deadeye stonks are dropping in all categories as people start to find better ways to either run with Pathfinder or just find other classes to play with and push with. Next is the Hardcore League class popularity. In general for Hardcore League, we tend to see more survivable classes going higher in popularity, and actually at the very beginning of this, the Infernalist minion build, largely just pushed by Crypt, so some of like the largest content creators for this kind of game, ended up influencing a lot of decisions on what people decided to run in general. But Infernalist with a minion build gives you a great option in that the minions that you have can absorb projectiles and block mechanics and stop melee enemies from getting to you, but they also have ways to convert physical damage into elemental damage so that you can use more of your resistances to absorb some of that. So Infernalist has a great wide set of tools that they can use to keep themselves alive, and from the very beginning they were very high in popularity in Hardcore. However, just like we saw before with Stormweaver and Deadeye in the Standard League, in Hardcore we're seeing a pretty significant drop in Infernalist, and again with Deadeye. The Ranger Deadeye stonks are just dropping hard. Titan dropping, Warbringer Titan, people just abandoning their warriors for Hardcore League in general, and then Witch Hunter also was under 1% 2 weeks ago, and now they're dropping even further down to be at the very, very bottom with that. Keep in mind, some of these classes that are lower representation will fluctuate more because they have less representation in the overall leagues, but at least we can see the trend line going there. An interesting piece from the Hardcore League, though, is we are seeing a rise in Pathfinder, which is pretty close to the drop in Deadeye. And I think a lot of people are running more of the Concoction Pathfinder build. Not only does it give you a better way to use the Herald of Ice, Herald of Thunder, Cascade, infinite interaction between the two by just doing a Frost Concoction, freezing, triggering Herald of Thunder, then triggering Herald of Ice, and yada, yada, yada. But also it doesn't require you to use things like Snipe or just any wind-up shots that require you to stand still or put yourself at risk. Pathfinder can move around a lot more and use concoctions and things like that, along with some various other combinations that make it really, really strong. It's kind of sad to see Titan and Warbringer dropping down here in the Hardcore League popularity, especially Titan, considering how durable they can be. The biggest problem is that they just have to rely almost primarily on armor, and armor just has so many flaws with it right now. Even if they did like a hybrid armor evasion build, it still is kind of rough, and anything that they do moving away from armor, like going to evasion, which is typically dexterity based, or energy shield, which is typically intelligence based, it costs a lot more for a warrior in the bottom left corner of the skill tree to push towards those kinds of stats because they're so far away from the things that make it really, really strong. Even with annulments or anoints or instillments, it just becomes really hard to make that work perfectly for a Titan or a Warbringer in general. We are seeing a rise of Stormweaver and Invoker into this, and I think some of that's just because they are the two best ascendancies in the game right now. They have some of the strongest builds, and people really understand what makes those builds tick. The Archmage Spark build for Stormweaver, or either the Frost or Lightning dual Herald, like Lightning intelligence spamming with Hoa, or like the Freeze dual Herald build for Invoker. Both of those are very well kind of theory crafted and figured out, and people are just kind of pushing that. But I think the biggest thing to see is that people are starting to lose out on their Infernalists and push more towards these other classes, and we're also seeing a loss in Deadeye, and it seems like some of that's just going to Pathfinder, which is pretty cool to see. Moving on to Hardcore SSF, the hardest version of the game that you can get. Hardcore means that if you die, you lose your league status and get dropped in Standard. SSF means you can't interact with other players, you can't group up and take on bosses, and you can't trade to get better gear. You have to make it or find it yourself. Solo self-found. So from that standpoint, we see a kind of a similar spread, just a little bit more exaggerated relative. Hardcore SSF tends to be the most insulated league, and that the stats change the least because people just kind of pick what they like and they put a lot of effort into making it work. And they're also incredibly careful with how they build their character and how they go about the world. But we do see a similar trend line here. Infernalist dropping down in Hardcore SSF, Invoker, Stormweaver, and Pathfinder rising up in SSF, and then Deadeye, Titan, Warbringer dropping down, Witch Hunter still getting lower. Oh my god, poor Witch Hunter. Help the Witch Hunters of the world out. Chronomancer's still down here at the bottom, Acolyte Cholula as well. We actually do see a drop in Blood Mage and Gemling, even though Blood Mage and Gemling are on the rise right now in the other leagues. In Hardcore SSF, they are lowering their popularity. There's still the Temporalis build for Blood Mage that's quite strong, and the attribute stacking build for Gemling that's also very strong, but even then, that is not really reaching the Hardcore SSF crowd. I'm seeing massive rises in Pathfinder. I think just the concoction builds are just so safe and so easy, and that kind of encourages you to play that a lot more in hardcore, I would say, and they're able to climb a lot better as they move into the higher levels of ladder. Now let's look at survival rates since 2 weeks ago. Again, this is the amount of these ascendancies in the top leaderboards, what percentage of them are still alive and pushing, and how many of them have died relative. And so that tells you like what their total survival rate is by class. If it's 100%, it means that every single of that ascendancy that's up in the leaderboard is still alive. None of them have recorded deaths. We can't go lower than the leaderboards here, so there's definitely some challenges there. And you will see with classes like Chronomancer, Acolyte of Cholula, or Witch Hunter, you're going to see some bigger, standard deviations on these because they are less represented in the leaderboards, which means that one dead Acolyte of Chalupa is going to have more of a statistical impact on the overall survival rate than one dead Infernalist, for example, so just keep that in mind. But it is still an interesting thing to look at. Hardcore League survival, you can see that basically all the survival rates have gone up since 2 weeks ago, which means that the people that made it into like the mid to high 90s are obviously, they know exactly what they're doing, they've been grinding very safely, and they're pushing. And even though they are, doing Arbiter of Ash, pushing higher and higher maps, clearing out all of the bosses' potential, doing Trial Master and stuff like that, they're able to unlock these things. It seems like they are surviving better than they were. And it also could just be that the people that were gonna die died out 2 weeks ago, and the surviving members are the ones that were meant to live a long time. So pretty much every class in hardcore has gone up in survival rate since 2 weeks ago, except for Stormweaver and Titan. They had a drop off. Now, some of this could just be the loss in popularity as well, which means people are just abandoning their Stormweavers and their Titans, specifically their Titans, but even Warbringer coming up in survivability of the ones that are still on the leaderboard. A bit different for hardcore SSF. You can see that there are some drops in survival rate. Titan way down at the bottom, not only at the lowest survival rate, but also down since 2 weeks ago. Witch Hunter at the second lowest, but has come up a little bit. Of the Witch Hunters that are still up on the leaderboards, 33% of them are still alive, which is better than it was before. Stormweaver, Pathfinder, and Infernalist coming down in survival rate. I kind of expected Pathfinder to come up here since they are finding tankier ways to build Pathfinder at the current moment, and Stormweaver I thought was going to go higher as well, but even in hardcore SSF, they're not safe from that as far as that goes. And on top of that, every other ascendancy has gone up in survival rate, kind of like hardcore, obviously, since they can't trade and do things like that, but they at least can still, they figured out how to deal with the content that they have and start building for that in general. So that's what we got for the survival rates, class popularity since 2 weeks ago. I think it's going to be really interesting once we see the patch go live this week to see how much of a swing we get in these numbers going forward. And also, once we get a full reset, like we actually get an economy reset or a league reset for early access, then things get way interesting. So I might do these popularity videos more frequently at the start of a reset, and then maybe less frequently towards the end, since the stats become a little less variable from that point. So we'll kind of have to vary it based on what the stats are, but this is going to be this like the second checkup of January, basically. Let me know what you think about this. Is there anything that you see in here that I didn't mention or that I missed as far as ideas on why these numbers are changing the way they are, what builds are impacting that? Let me know all that stuff down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.